Good morning, everyone. I'm so sorry for the delay. My internet or my computer was not hooking up to the internet, so I appreciate your patience. My name is Brian Edwards. I'm the curator over at Genesee Country Village Museum. I've been in that position for just over 4 years now. So thank you so much for joining me this morning for Redeeming the Irredeemable, the Diabolical Striped Garment. So what sort of inspired me to talk about stripes is I've always heard stories that stripes were for bad people or for societal undesirables or reprobates. I also grew up and am Catholic still, and I remember seeing striped garments for very specific individuals in the Bible and in Catholic iconography, and always wondered why are stripes so bad? Why do people dress shady characters, duplicitous characters in stripes? So that really is what inspired me to do some of this research. If anyone has any questions throughout, feel free to just ask. I tend to avoid telling people to leave your questions to the end because you might forget what your question was. So please feel free to ask throughout the presentation. So again, a little bit about me. I'm the curator over at the Wehle Gallery at Genesee Country Village Museum. I worked for just under 10 years in the mental health sector and thought in March of 2020, this global pandemic I'm hearing about is not enough stress. Like, let's do a complete career change as well. So my first day of work as curator was Monday, March 23rd, 2020. It was from my living room by Zoom, and I got furloughed in the first 10 minutes of starting this new career. So it was a baptism of fire, and I'm very happy that I stuck it out because it's a wonderful dream job working in museums. Besides that, I pursued my undergraduate at Adelphi down in Long Island, but I am from upstate New York, originally from Macedon over in Wayne County. So many of the pieces we're going to see today in this presentation come from the Bruce and Susan Green costume collection that we house over at Genesee Country Village Museum. Susan and her now late husband Bruce started collecting around the bicentennial. They found a little 1825 frock with a matching pantalette set at a garage sale for $2.50, and that was the germ that sort of grew into this gigantic collection that Bruce and Susan collected. In 2010, the museum purchased the collection from Susan. She has since moved from Alfred, New York, up to Rochester, and we're very privileged to have Susan essentially still adding to her collection to this day. So she'll text me at like 11 o'clock at night, like, did you see this dress at this auction? I think we should go halves on it together for the collection. So we're very lucky, privileged to have Susan as a benefactress to the collection to this day. It's a comprehensive collection, so it will take you from underwear to outerwear for men, women, and children across the 19th century. So today, some of the themes we're going to talk about are, like, what are stripes? How do you define stripes? What are some of the historic scene setting from biblical times to medieval Europe? We're going to look at revolutionary and democratic stripes at the end of the 18th century, and then how stripes sort of trickle into civilian wear, are used to define criminality in the 19th century, and how stripes have grown out of their ubiquity into all sorts of different kinds of stripes and the associations we have with those stripes. From hygienic to nautical to athletic and leisure to infantile stripes. So from the beginning, what exactly are stripes? So technically, if you're weaving a fabric and you happen to have one thread a different color from the rest, you've created a stripe. So from the very beginning of weaving technology, hundreds of thousands of years ago, stripes were always something that you could sort of happen upon in that weaving process. If we're going to further define stripes, they tend to be lines, straight lines that are regular and repeat at a regular occurrence, with at least 2 different colors. So you can have many variations of stripes, from different thicknesses and widths to different numbers or sort of repeats or batches of stripes, or different colors of stripes. So in this case, we're not talking about plaid or tartan, which essentially is like a perpendicular intersection of 2 repeats of stripes. We're talking about what I'm wearing today, where you have regular lines at regular intervals of at least 2 different colors. So lines in and of themselves and stripes are very visually striking. They are high-vis patterns that draw your eye in and are conspicuous. They make themselves known. If you want someone to notice something, you can use like a highlight color or a hot color, or you can put like stripes on it. So it immediately draws your eye to that area, to that pattern. In that sense, stripes particularly bar or create division and delineation between objects, between people, between bodies. And because of that quality, that reaction our brain has to stripes, they've been used throughout architecture, fashion, history, to help draw attention to something and bar either you from that object or bar the object from the outside world. So it's even in the name. So rayer, to remove, to delete, to eliminate, to strike off a list or to make stripes. Corriger, to punish, to strike, almost like with a whip, to strike someone with a whip. As well as in prisons, imprisonment, to barrer, to bar someone, to strike someone, to put them behind bars within their clothing, or even in the Latin root stri, to streak, to strike, to line, to furrow, to deprive someone of something. So if you're thinking of the etymology of the word stripe, from the very beginning in its root, it's associated with creating that division, creating a barrier, barring someone in behind the stripes or protecting the outside world from what lies within those stripes. Stripes also have your brain can have a very specific reaction to them. So perfect stripes out in nature don't really exist. That's not something we were created or evolved to perceive regularly in the environment. Their stripes are sort of artificial, an artificial regulated pattern that does not usually occur in nature without human intervention. So our brains aren't really wired to pick up, not to pick up on stripes. Our brains did not evolve with stripes within its presence, and that denotes a biological mechanism to why they draw our attention so quickly and across cultures, across time periods. Now, when you look at stripes for a very long time, there are certain studies that look at brain activity of people living in urban areas, specifically with skyscrapers that have vertical stripes on them. So there are a few skyscrapers in Rochester that literally have white stripes in their architecture created. And what they found was that stripes will elicit gamma wave oscillations in the brain, which for a long period of time can cause nausea or dizziness, visual distortions, or even migraines. Some people, it's almost like a strobe light where it could induce a seizure if that's all you're seeing for a long period of time in front of you. Your brain can't tell what is the background and what is the foreground in a striped field, and you can temporarily lose sense of surrounding or your physical presence within a space. So there's a biological mechanism of stripes making us feel uncomfortable that is playing into why we're using stripes on certain groups of people to clothe them. So a few pieces from 19th century clothing in the Bruce and Susan Green costume collection. The fabric remnant on the left uses a printing machine called the Rose Engine machine. And it uses stripes in different patterns to create almost like a moire or wood grain effect. This is how, if you look at dollar bills, this is the same printing technique they use in dollar bills. The gown on the right also uses stripes in this sort of, it's a copper cylinder print, roller print design that we have here. So it's stripes, and within each stripe, there are those little stripes. So I'll be honest, the dress on the right doesn't bother me, but that fabric remnant, if I look at it too long, I'm like, oh, I don't like looking at this. It makes me feel nauseous from the pattern on that. So some scene setting, like why exactly are stripes bad? So some people will refer to Deuteronomy and Leviticus in the Bible when it says, do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. So the translation of that is a bit dubious, just like stripes. Are they talking about two fiber contents that shouldn't be mixed, or two colors, or two different pieces of fabric altogether sewn together which create that striped pattern? So some individuals will use these verses from the Bible as evidence that like even biblically stripes have leave a bad taste in our mouths, or in our brains, I should say. But in the Western world, one of the first historic events that is very well documented of being sort of a negative reaction against stripes is in the 13th century when Louis IX, he goes out to the Far East in what is now Palestine, and brings back the Carmelite order of monks in 1254. And they have these very distinctive cloaks, which we have an image of stripes, of like a cream white with a dark brownish black stripe. And that refers to the striping of, I believe it was Elijah when he's taken up into heaven and there are flames around him as he's taken up. So those stripes refer to the scoring that he experienced on his way up. And their cloaks represent that scoring, and they're, again, that root word, les frères barrés, or the barred brothers, because their cloaks are barred in those stripes. And there is an instant negative reaction when Louis IX brings these Carmelite monks back into Europe. And people are outraged by these stripes. Not only does it immediately call their attention, but they feel extremely uncomfortable with these striped monks in their presence. Now we'll go into how the medieval eye is sort of viewing the world and why those stripes seem so duplicitous. But only 6 years later, Pope Alexander IV orders that you can't wear these cloaks anymore. There are literal riots in the street. I'm getting all these letters and petitions that these monks are causing disorder just by existing in these robes. And most of them abandon their cloaks. There are a few pockets that refuse to change their robe, but eventually they all essentially follow suit, no pun intended, and get rid of their bars or their stripes. An additional explanation as to why there was such a strong reaction is that stripes, and these striped cloaks in particular, looked very similar to the Muslim halaba. So there is this non-Christian, non-white, Oriental or Muslim association with these stripes that is distasteful to a sort of white Christian eye in the Middle Ages of Europe. So if we're looking at imagery, and this is sort of where like my Catholic upbringing inspired me to look into this, in early medieval Europe, a lot of sort of duplicitous characters are always clothed in stripes, sometimes yellow as well for cowardice, often with the image of Judas. So the medieval eye is often viewing the world in well-defined layers, whether it's sort of the strata of society or class or religion, but specifically medieval artwork is rendered in very defined layers of like a background, a midground, a foreground, and a subject in certain objects. And if you think about it, stripes, you can't really tell like what is the background, what is the foreground. Is it, if it's a black and white stripe like my phone case, is the black the background or is the white the background? And so that inability to decide the quality of something leads to feelings of discomfort and distrust. This is a duplicitous person wearing these stripes. This is someone that maybe is a little shady or dodgy or cagey, and I'm not quite sure how to feel about this person, this object, this situation. It's definitely calling my attention. I can't ignore it, but it's making me feel uncomfortable in a certain way. So we often see the devil or Judas in artwork depicted in stripes. In the real world, there are also authorities in the Western Europe are sometimes making sumptuary laws that certain groups have to wear stripes. So sometimes you'll see references to lepers being given stripes, or sometimes Jewish individuals wearing stripes in a predominantly Christian area or country. Sometimes the hangmen, the men that are, or executioners, are dressed in stripes. There's a duplicitous quality, there's an attention, high vis quality to stripes. There's also an undeniable attention drawing quality to stripes. And it makes sense why we would want to, people we want to avoid or be able to identify to not associate with them, why you would dress them in stripes. Now, if you're moving out of the medieval Europe into early Renaissance, stripes start to take on an element outside of duplicitous dodginess. We start to see stripes show up a lot in medieval heraldry. Now, in heraldry, were people actually wearing these ensembles in real life? No. The imagery used in heraldry is symbolic, so you can define someone on an image or out on the battlefield with their house without question. And stripes, you can be used by multiple houses, and they're all still individually identifiable by the different color they're using for stripes. So it can be individualized, differentiated, but it still retains that high-vis, attention-seeking quality. And we also start to see different stripes integrated into specifically the livery and the garb of servants in the musician class in medieval and Renaissance Europe. Yes?
Just to clarify something for me, when you talked about the medieval, that they weren't wearing these costumes as part of their daily activity, they were just part of their house. Can you describe what you mean by a house? Is it like the group of people? Or is it like a flag that they would be wearing in the field?
Great question.
So I'm confused about house.
So in heraldry, you have essentially your crest or your emblem for the family that you belong to. So when I say house, I mean not just the physical house you're in, but sort of the hereditary lineage to which you belong. If it's part of like the landed gentry and you're not a peasant, you would have an emblem or a herald for your house. And when different people marry into different houses, that changes, it's altered a bit. And stripes are often integrated into the visual heraldry because they're attention seeking. You can easily identify a house with a very specific color palette in stripes. But if you were part of house, like my last name is Brooks. So if you were part of House Brooks, in everyday life, you're not going to be wearing a medieval ensemble with the colors of your house on them. when you're gonna see it in real life is mostly like on a banner or a flag when you are representing that house, like on the battlefield, or if you're a dignitary or an ambassador for your house at court or another foreign land. So people weren't, wearing heraldic clothing in everyday life, but they're shown wearing their family's crest, their family's imagery, symbolism, and depictions of the family. So when you're viewing the picture, you can say, oh, this person is part of that family, this person is part of that house, or they represent these very specific groups of people.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So moving into the late 18th century, we start to see stripes used in revolutionary activities. The American flag is a striped flag with the 13 stripes of red and white, referring to both the white of the purity of the intentions to create a land of freedom and independence, and the red being the blood that was shed to fight and continues to be shed to fight to ensure that freedom and that liberty. In Europe, the sort of three-striped flag with different color variations is all over. Like there are more countries in the world that just have a three-striped flag than any other flag throughout the globe. And those revolutionary stripes, mostly both ours and that of France, come from this period in the late 18th century, really a period of political turmoil, where some monarchies are being eliminated, and republics and democracies are being set up in their stead. So if we're thinking about the French Revolution, the sans culotte, which means without pants, without breeches, I should say. So the ruling class, the aristocratic class, they are wearing court dress, which for men includes breeches or knickers that end right below the knee. The working classes, the third estate, the peasant class, does not have access to that clothing. They are wearing pants, or what we would call pants or trousers. Nautical sailors and workmen are also wearing those pants and trousers. And during the French Revolution, they take on a white and red stripe at this time. So again, you can identify me not only that I am not part of this corrupt aristocratic class, I am actively against them. And here is this undeniable attention drawing pattern on my body as part of the sans culotte group of men that will identify me in that way. Yes?
Did the revolutionaries in the Revolutionary War adopt the stripe part because they were revolutionary? They were announcing to the world that they were in opposition to the establishment.
That is absolutely one of the outcomes of wearing and identifying with those stripes. Yes. And the American Revolution is happening like just before the French Revolution, like within a 10-year period. So we're all kind of co-opting those stripes in the pursuit of democracy at that same time. Now, another symbol you'll see during the French Revolution is the Phrygian cap, which in the ancient world, if you were an enslaved person, you were not given a head covering. And when during manumissions, one of the first things that would be given to you is a hat or a cap in this shape. So the red Phrygian cap is associated with liberty, with freedom, with pursuits, and really the fighting for that freedom for yourself and for your country. And the French revolutionaries wear this cap, specifically with the three-striped cockade on the side, again associated with sort of combining that striped imagery with that cap. And if you look at the United States seal of the Senate, that cap is in that seal to this day. Now, after the French Revolution, there are other groups of people that attempt to they're almost like anti-revolutionaries, called the Jeunesse dorée, or the Gilded Youth. And they fight against the sans culotte, and they're brutal. They beat them up in the street. And they sort of co-opt stripes and create like an aristocratic stripe, where it's like, we are using these stripes against you, and we are literally and figuratively fighting against you, and we're gonna put on stripes as well. And it confuses and equivocates that environment in France. After, sort of when the French Revolution settles down, there is this new, both in the UK, in France, parts of continental Europe, and in America, there's this new appeal of democracy, this new appeal of freedom and liberty. And stripes take on, along with architecture and furnishings, elements of like neoclassicism. So stripes, they're still emblematic of democracy and freedom and liberty, but it's sort of freedom and liberty that, with the violence taken out, they represent a balancing of forces, both internally in the individual and within society. So that stripe makes its way, excuse me, into civilian wear. And again, those stripes, especially like these, you see a lot of like tone-on-tone stripes at this time in neoclassical wear, and it alludes to, again, sort of this new restrained, symmetrical, balanced stripe that is aligned with classicism, essentially. You know, the bedrock of democracy being ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Yes?
Can you explain what tone on tone means?
Absolutely. So if we're looking at this suit here from Rochester Museum and Science Center, it's a woven stripe, and it's the same color thread for both, but one of the stripes is achieved with a satin stitch and the other is just a basket weave stitch. So the satin stitch is like the shiny stripe, the background is the woven stripe. So when you have the same color thread making a pattern with like a satin stitch or a basket stitch, you often hear it referred to as tone on tone. It's like a subdued type of stripe. And we start to see these stripes abstracted from their bloody revolutionary ties trickle into civilian wear. And in men's wear, you often see them in pants, and very often you see them in waistcoats. Invariably horizontal, thin stripes. And since we start to see stripes springing up everywhere in men's wear and some women's wear, they start to take on different qualities. Whereas usually fat, horizontal stripes are seen as like vulgar and garish and seedy, whereas thin stripes, particularly thin vertical stripes, take on elements or associations of elegance, refinement, balance, and reserve. Stripes in women's wear do exist. They're often achieved with other patterns. So like you can have bars of like floral designs, or waves or undulating vines, and you can create different kinds of stripes with different patterns. So it's almost, again, it's stripes are being subdued and refined even more in the beginning of the 19th century in men and women's clothing. We have some fashion plates here, as well as a daguerreotype of different kinds of stripes achieved with different patterns. At this, especially in the early 19th century, when women's wear takes on sort of a straight column-like silhouette, you can think Bridgerton or Jane Austen era. There's a preference for white muslin in women's wear, not colorful clothing, not striped, not patterned. But if you're thinking of the silhouette itself at that time, you're essentially a column. So you're recalling those elements of neoclassicism in the ancient world, where your silhouette is almost like a column from a Greek temple, and the fluting on the column and the pleating of the dress below the bust line alludes almost to stripes and line work as well. Now, children's wear, we start to see stripes integrated into children's wear in the 19th century, and they're often on a very white ground with a very thin dark red or dark blue or dark green stripe. And we start to associate this kind of stripe with a few different qualities. One, of course, being youthfulness, cleanliness, and in like a tidy sense, tidy sensation. So these are not, revolutionary children with weapons going to war, fighting for freedom. This is the new idea of childhood that emerges in the 19th century, as children as sort of this tabula rasa, and you must rear them and grow them into adult humans. There's an innocence, a purity associated with childhood starting in the 19th century. And these stripes that we create for children's wear take on those elements, but also give the child that quality as well. So it's like a symbiotic relationship that is emerging with the use of this kind of stripe. So there's a playfulness to it. It's almost like candy a bit, like a candy stripe. And you see that in their outerwear and the underwear that children are wearing. It's a very cheerful kind of stripe. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, there is like a cleanliness quality to that childhood stripe, and that lends itself also to bed ticking, the stripe in bed ticking. So before there was denim, there was ticking, and it is a tightly woven, work-hardy material that is like a white ground with a light blue stripe over it. And we start to see that ticking used on really intimate items within our daily life. So the mattress that you're sleeping on, the lining of your clothes, some of the underwear that we are wearing, some of the small clothing items we're putting on our vulnerable, innocent new child. If these stripes were dangerous, you wouldn't want to put it on an infant who is just new to this world. But since it's the clean, hygienic stripe, it's totally safe for that child. And objects within our life and clothing pieces that we're putting close to our body, if not the first on the naked body. With that cleanly stripe or hygienic stripe, as we tend to think of it, there's also the cleaning or like the labor or the working stripe. So when you have a blue and white stripe or a blue and white check, you will sometimes see as well. We often see that in workwear. So aprons, short gowns, like at-home gowns, work smocks. It hides stains very, very well. The blue dye they're using at this time is more color fast than other dyes, so that lends to its appeal as well. There are some fashion researchers that will assert that blue and white stripes, the working, the cleaning stripe, and blue and white check is where are the great grandparents of blue collar clothing that we have today associated with working and laboring. And so some more examples of how we're putting those stripes on underwear items, in this case stockings. We see a lot of, again, thin vertical stripes at the end of the 18th century, and then we start to see colorful horizontal stripes on stockings later into the 19th century. And of course they become much more colorful with the advent of aniline dyes, synthetic dyes, after 1856. And then of course we have another kind of stripe. This is the stripe of criminality. So in the early 19th century, really in the 1820s, there are two sort of competing prison systems. One is in Pennsylvania, and it's based on like a Quaker form of punishment, where individuals are essentially in what we would call like solitary confinement. And if you can think in like a Quaker society, one of the harshest punishments you can experience is being shunned by your community. So that like shunning is utilized in the Pennsylvania Quaker prison system, where people are put into solitary confinement. But in Auburn, New York, in the 1820s, a new system is emerging called the Auburn system, where you are put into, you're silent in a chain gang, so you're linked up, and everyone wears horizontal stripes. and not just any horizontal stripes, but fat, garish, black and white or black on gray stripes. So not only is this high vis, guards can tell exactly who's a prisoner and who is not a prisoner. If you were to escape, they're gonna see out in the woods or out in the field like a zebra walking down the street. They're gonna know who you are and where you came from and why you should not be there. And the clothing the clothing itself is, you're almost imprisoned in your own clothing. You are barred in your clothing. The outside world is protected from the person inside the barred clothing that they're wearing, that these people are wearing. And it's very soon, it works like a charm, and it's very soon adopted by prisons around the United States and even outside the United States. Now, they moved away from stripes in 1920, about 100 years after they emerged, because they part of the progressive era, they thought they were rather inhumane and dehumanizing, which they certainly are. And they started to wear orange and like tan. With the popularity of orange is the new black, modern prison systems, specifically this example, the Saginaw jail in Michigan, they are saying that prisoners like the orange because it's trendy now and it's cool to wear the orange. So they argued to bring the stripes back, and they are now wearing striped garments again. This is part of the, quote, no frills movement in modern prison systems. They try to create laws every year at a national level to require prisoners to, not have access to like the internet or TV or this and that, but one of the provisions is always that they should be wearing stripes. And that bill is continually voted against and not enacted. And I wonder if it has something to do with those stripes being in that bill every time, because they are they're dehumanizing. In the 19th century, outside of criminal stripes, there's also a commodifying of certain kinds of experiences. So although we don't have a royal family here in America, we in the 19th century, even arguably now, are looking over the pond and viewing the elite royal family in the UK and wanting to emulate that, especially if you are part of the middle class. They say the middle class is the most anxious class because we can see what we want to become and we can see the dreaded specter of what we don't want to become beneath us in the social sphere. So when we are sort of trying to emulate what the royals are doing, what emerges out of the 1840s and 50s is this idea of belle morality. So Victoria and Albert purchase a hunting lodge in Balmoral, Scotland, and they turn it into a castle. And they're spending lots of time up in the Scottish Highlands, and there's this romanticizing of Scottish culture and tartan and plaid mania that sort of takes over the world and in the UK, continental Europe, and America. And when they're sort of enjoying the Scottish Highland terrain, it's cold, it's windy, it's wet. You have to adapt your wardrobe. So Victoria is hitching up the outer skirt, revealing the petticoat beneath. Now that the world sees that part of the petticoat, you gotta decorate it. And invariably what they're decorating it with is like a red background and black horizontal stripes along the edge of the petticoat, or like a reddish tartan in the background. And dressmakers, dry goods owners are jumping on this opportunity and saying, but this is not any ordinary petticoat, this is a Balmoral petticoat and you need one too. And there are also Balmoral boots that become widely popular. They don't have stripes, but the Balmoral petticoats do, and they set this trend for sort of black stripes on a solid ground, usually red. And this shows up in children's clothing, it shows up in the petticoats, it shows up in advertisements, and they're wildly popular throughout the 50s and early 60s. By the mid-60s, the elite classes are noticing, the hoi polloi are wearing this Balmoral petticoat. It is now passé, we won't be wearing it any longer. But often from like the 1850s onward, if you see a petticoat with black stripes beneath, it is probably because of a Balmoral petticoat starting that trend. So of course we have other kinds of stripes like the nautical stripe. And again, Victoria and Albert are setting a trend with this as well. So they took little Prince Albert in 1846 aboard the royal yacht in like a diminutive little sailor suit. And this portrait was etched and published widely across the world. And people fell in love with the idea of dressing your child in a little sailor suit. And French sailors often had what is now known as the Breton shirt, which has 21 stripes horizontal going down the shirt. So both the Breton shirt and the little sailor suit they combine and they exist independently from one another, but the idea of like nautical attire, nautical swimwear, seaside clothing, and that stripe from the Breton shirt all sort of merge and create this uniform both for little boys and little girls and adults, specifically adult women in their new swimming and bathing costumes, where it's like a dark navy blue wool ground and like a white stripe, usually along the edges or trimming, or like a little triangle of striped shirt peeking out from beneath the outer costume. So there is an element of leisure and athleticism and luxury to this nautical stripe. You have to have the free time and the resources to travel to the beach, to have this proper ensemble, and to have the skill set to swim out into the ocean. So there is a, not exactly elitist, but sort of luxury, seaside, leisure, athletic quality to these nautical stripes to this day. You can find them in, like cabanas are often striped, French awnings are often striped for this exact quality. Beach towels, beach balls have that nautical stripe. Sailors' trousers often have those stripes, and they can often be made out of ticking in and of itself. So now we love the ticking so much close to us that we're putting it on the outside of our bodies for the world to see. So we have actual sailor striped sailor's trousers, civilian trousers from the Bruce and Susan Green costume collection, and again, another advertisement for this nautical stripe in adult women's bathing ensembles from the late 19th century. Now this fashion play I find particularly amusing because he's going out hunting and he has an entire ensemble of blue and white stripes, and his waistcoat is red and white stripe. You can see it peeking out beneath, and you can almost see his wife like cautioning him, like, now don't you get that suit dirty when you're out. It looks like he's about to go waterfowling. So I wanted to also show, not just fashion plates and clothing, but images from the 19th century of people wearing different kinds of stripes. And some of them are patterned stripes, some of them are pretty chunky stripes, like that woman in the middle. Other individuals are using stripes to not only draw attention to their clothing, but also enhance whatever the fashion ideal for that time is. So if you take a vertical stripe, you can cut it down the middle and make them go diagonal to make your waist look all the smaller. Like all points are leading to this tiny area, which is my tiny little waist here. Now we mentioned in medieval, stripes being used in the medieval world for heraldry to identify different families and houses. And in the sport world, it's the same thing. Instead of houses, it's sports teams. And many different sports teams can use stripes in different colorways, and you can have a whole bunch of different stripes on the field, but you can still identify who is part of which team. American baseball in particular has a history of using those stripes. You can find stripes in other sports, but for some reason baseball seems to be the sport that really adopted the stripe the most. And then of course we know who during a soccer game is wearing stripes. The umpire, the person that you need to know where they are at all times, what they're doing, they will wear that high vis stripe. And there are, outside of clothing, again, all sorts of stripes that draw our attention, from cabanas to the awnings. The hygienic stripe in our toothpaste, that is why that stripe is there. It is part of that hygienic stripe tradition. Or on a barbering pole. There was a time when barbers were also your town surgeon. So that the red refers to the way blood, and a barber could participate and perform like bloodletting on you in a time of illness. And when your arm is hanging down and blood is coming out of it, it will swirl down your arm in that same pattern like a barber's pole. And of course, black and yellow striping on the roadside to draw your attention. The road's about to get very curvy, or the road is wet, or you should slow down. A deer crossing, or a railroad crossing. You will see stripes to this day throughout our world to draw your attention to something. Caution, notice this, there might be danger. And in clothing, we can still see stripes today, again from the Empire to Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, that she's wearing a Breton shirt. We have sort of like a childlike, playful criminal in his stripes, and then duplicitous characters like Beetlejuice, of course, and the striped stockings on the Witch of the East before the shoes disappear and her feet curl up. I always hated that part of the movie, it creeped me out. But stripes to this day are used both in diabolical situations, but more often than not, we use stripes to draw attention and to carry out those traditions of luxury, of leisure wear, of cleanliness, of tidiness. And stripes continue to evolve throughout time. So thank you so much for joining me today for our